So you know your faith is the real thing when it stands up to pressure, when it's tested, is how you know. And there are times, you all know it, there are times when you feel that God is ignoring you. He doesn't answer prayer. It's as if he's asleep. And that's a significant challenge. And it leads us to a number of feelings, including fear, because we're just not being answered. Will we believe then? So it's easy to believe, isn't it, when you pray and it's answered. When you pray and it appears not to be answered, when things aren't quite right, then will you believe? And that's just the situation here in Mark 4, 35, the end of the chapter. And you'll notice, sorry for saying it again, but you notice that it is the end of chapter 4 and just before chapter 5. So chapter 4 has 4 parables about the power of the word. And then now what we have here is it's not working. And then we hear an effectual word. Chapter 5, this comes just before chapter 5, including this event, there are 4 miracles. And in each miracle, there's a reason to doubt Jesus. So Jesus is here in the boat, and it's the same Jesus that we worship here today. And so this is a call to see his identity, to trust in the power of his word, and to trust his care for us. And really what I want to do now is equip us to do those things, to see that and to trust those things. And the ESV has helped us by translating things consistently at this point. So 3 times in this passage we get the word great. And I'm going to marvel you with my knowledge of the Greek language. The Greek word is mega, which is really helpful, isn't it? And the mega something. So he draws our attention to the turning points in the story with the word mega. You have a mega wind. ESV says windstorm. It's literally just wind. A mega wind, a mega calm, and a mega fear. So a mega wind in verses 35 to 38. These verses Mark is helping us put ourselves in their shoes or their boat to feel the situation. He's setting the scene of what we're grappling with. So he says, just a couple of things to notice. He says on the same day, they crossed the lake by boat. So the same day means the same day of chapter 4. So Jesus is out teaching all day, and he's got to a point he's exhausted and he falls asleep. So just notice that Jesus fell asleep. He is human. So he did all the human-y things that we do. When I was sort of primary school age, there was the Jesus of Nazareth TV series, and the actor, I can't remember his name, picture his face, when he played Jesus, he decided, I don't know how he did this, but he decided, whenever he's in shot, to never blink, to show there's something special about Jesus. Jesus he blinked. Do you blink? Right, Jesus blinked. If you go to the loo, Jesus went to the loo. He was human. He looked ordinary. So we notice as he crosses the lake, he leaves the crowd. So he's with that inner circle that we've seen the last few weeks, those who are privy to Jesus' personal teaching as he unpacks things that others missed. So that's the scene. And then that's when it happens. Verse 37, a great windstorm arose and the waves were breaking into the boat. So the boat was already filling. Literally mega wind. So the Lake of Galilee, sometimes called the Sea of Galilee, is relatively thin, very long, either side of mountains, and there were sudden storms with no warning. And I remember saying this once in church, perhaps it was on this passage, and there was someone who'd been a holiday rep in Galilee, and she confirmed that's exactly right. Very unpredictably, wind just comes down between these mountains and stirs up big storms on the sea or the lake. No warning. And you get little eyewitness details in chapter 4 and chapter 5. And things that you think, someone must notice that. So one little detail, Jesus had his head on a cushion. But also another detail that's repeated through the Gospels. And that's the disciples don't come across very well. There's no real heroes in the Bible apart from Jesus. And I think it's a mark of authenticity, just little things the writer notices. And this, that throughout history, as far as someone's going to come up with an example now, but as far as I'm aware, those who write history put themselves favourably, not in the Bible. Everyone comes along across a bit silly. And so what we have here is the disciples who are by trade fishermen. In other words, they're not like us. They're not like you. They're used to the water. They're used to rough waters and storms, and yet even they are afraid. You know, you might be a bit afraid crossing over to Calais. Now, these people are used to those kind of conditions and worse. They're afraid this is a proper storm. And so we get the idea this is a mega wind if even they are afraid. So just clock that for now. Being a Christian is not plain sailing. I was realizing as I was preparing this, I kept on just puns, kept on flowing out of me, not always intentionally. But being a Christian does not deliver you into an easy life now. There are versions of Christianity that do that. They're fake. If someone says become a Christian, life will be easier, and it's not true. And so here the disciples, just as they would have done before they met Jesus, find themselves in a situation that gives them cause for concern. They are fearing for their lives. And so they wake Jesus and they ask him, don't you care? And why would they ask that question? Well, we know, because they are genuinely fearful for their lives. They fear death. And they've got a right to think that because there's big waves, there's a big wind causing big waves, and they're actually crashing into the boat. And Jesus is asleep and would appear not to be worried at all. Now, I think perhaps we're meant to think here of Psalm 4. In Psalm 4, David is running for his life, and yet he entrusts himself to God and says, I will go to sleep and I will wake up. So he trusts, even in danger, that he can sleep. And Jesus is the man who trusts God. But the focus here is actually on the mega wind and the disciples' response. And Mark is painting a picture for us. The disciples who are used to the lake, they're used to bad weather, they fear. And this is a serious situation. Contrast Jesus asleep in the back of the boat. And they are angry with him. Don't you care? And I doubt there's anyone here who is at some point in their life, or it's not at some point in their life, had that experience with Jesus. I am really anxious or fearful or worried about what's next. And you are asleep, it appears. I'm in trouble and you're dozing. Don't you care? So that's the first thing we see is the mega wind, a mega problem. The next thing is a mega calm in verse 39. So I'll read that to you. So verse 39, and he, Jesus, awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. So what happens next here is remarkable, and it's remarkable by any standards. And the more you reflect on it and think about it, the more remarkable it is. Verse 39, Jesus speaks and there was a great calm. It's just one verse, few words, but it's packed with dynamite. Just look at it. He rebuked the wind and said to the water. Now, if you were there watching this, you'd think, well, Jesus is a nutter. Imagine speaking to the wind. He would look a total nutter if it weren't for the fact they then obeyed him. And it's not just they died down a bit. The mega wind is replaced with a mega calm. So after the storm, the waves have some momentum. It takes time to die down. So I've got a cup of water here, and I won't do a big demonstration because I'll make a mess. But we've got water. If I start moving the cup backwards and forwards quickly, obviously the water starts slurping. If I stop, the water carries on for a bit and then eventually stops. Oh, I've just demonstrated it. And so that's what happens when you have a storm. I've been on water before where it's been windy one day. I've been on the sea the next day, no wind, but the waves are still going. And that's particularly that happened in Galilee, because of the way these storms suddenly come up and go away, but the water stays for maybe a few days. Jesus, with a word, the wind stops, and then another, the waves stop. Also notice how he speaks to them. He says he rebukes them. That's the same word as in chapter 2, verse 25, when there's unclean spirit. Now, rebuke, I suppose that's a discipline word. It's like a bit like telling someone off or putting them right. So maybe we'll do that to a child. If you've got responsibility for a child, you might tell them off, and they may listen. That sometimes happens, or to a degree, or for a time. Jesus speaks to the spirit. Jesus speaks to the weather, and they do that. Jesus has more authority over the unclean spirits and the weather than we do over children in our care. And notice that Jesus doesn't pray to God here. We do see Jesus praying to his Father, but he doesn't do that here. In a very similar situation, Jonah, actually my notes actually said in the same boat, and I tried to avoid it. Jonah, in a similar situation, he prayed to God. He saw that God was sovereign over the wind and the waves. But Jesus addresses not God, not his Father. He addresses the weather directly, and it hears. And there's a bit of background to this. So Psalm 107, verses 23 to 30, and Proverbs 30, verse 4. God created the sea, and he speaks to it, and it obeys. Psalm 89, verse 9, 104, verse 7. The sea is described as chaotic and dangerous, and the Creator brings order out of them. So the weather here is recognizing the voice of he who made them. Jesus demonstrates that he's God. He shows all the authority of God himself. So we see in the boat his identity, God and man. Is God come as a man? Therefore, it's obvious what we should do. We should trust him, trust his power, that it's sufficient, and trust his wisdom, that he knows how and when to use his power. Now, that was true when he was asleep in the boat as well. He did not cease to be the same God who upholds the wind and the waves. And he's the same God now who reigns in heaven. Listen and trust Jesus' words because of who he is. And that ends in a mega fear that might surprise you. A mega fear in verses 40 to 41. So this little section ends with Jesus asking his disciples a question and us seeing their response. So verse 40, he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And your first response to that is, well, why are you even asking the question? Why are you afraid? Well, because really, I just nearly died. Why am I afraid? But Jesus implies there was no need to be afraid. In fact, not only was there no need to be afraid, but on the basis of what they'd seen and heard so far, on the basis of their experience of him, they should have known there was no need to be afraid. What is it they missed? Well, Jesus' next question is, have you no faith? And the word faith is the same word that's translated sometimes belief or trust. He's saying, don't you trust me? Don't you trust me with your life in the storm? If you knew my identity, then you would. If they trusted his care and his power, they would not fear the wind, not even a great wind. And their response to his question is just as striking. Verse 41, and they were filled with a great fear and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the waves, so even the wind and the sea, obey him? Literally, they have a mega fear. And a mega wind, a mega calm, which is unusual, and a mega fear. Why were they afraid? So they were afraid of the wind, and we saw that's surprising given their day job. They were afraid of the wind. Now they're not. That fear has been replaced by a fear for the man in the boat. They feared the wind, but they have a mega fear for the man in the boat. Now, why fear him? He just showed his care. Why do they fear him? We'll look at verse 41 again. Who then is this? Jesus said, do you have no faith? And they said, who is this? And actually, we know the answer. We've known the answer since the first sentence in Mark's Gospel. So Mark 1, verse 1 says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So that's the answer. He's the Son of God. He's the Christ. And we keep seeing through Mark, basically the first half of Mark is him unpacking verse 1. What do you mean, Son of God? What does that actually mean? And it means, what Mark's been showing us, is he's a man with all the authority of God himself. So we've seen that, haven't we? In his teaching, his authority over people, his authority in healing, his authority over the spirits, most strikingly perhaps over forgiveness of sins. That Jesus has the authority of God to forgive sins. Only God can do that. That's what his audience says. Only God can do that. And now he sees authority over creation, over nature. Now, two things these men knew very well. They knew the sea and they knew their psalms. They knew only the Creator God had authority over the wind and the waves. So Jesus shows, as a man, he has all the authority of God. Now, when we read the epistles in the New Testament, when we read John's Gospel, they state it. Mark shows it. The disciples they just keep looking clueless through the Gospels, don't they? But not here. Here, they nail it. It's the right response to realizing who's in the boat. It's the fear of the Lord. And you can picture it, can't you? You can imagine it dawning on them. So before the boat journey, they're seeing Jesus teaching. And before that, they'd seen him do miracles. And so they see Jesus and they see there's something special. They see there's something different. Then during the storm, they fear for their lives and he's asleep in the boat. At that point, they're just a bit annoyed. And then he calms the storm. And there's this dawning realization. Verse 41, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? If you watch an enjoyable film or read a good book, often, at least the sort of ones I watch and read, there's a mystery character, a superhero, a supervillain, or the baddie, and you don't know who it is. And then there's the great reveal and the gasp, unless you've already worked it out. All stories really, especially stories with this interesting twist, are really just knocking off the gospel. This is the great reveal. Actually, it's not the only one in the Bible, though, is it? That the Creator God who made the sea and the weather and us is the same person in the boat. And this is unique to Christianity. Unique to Christianity is that God became man. Also, what's unique to Christianity is that it claims to be real history. Now, a valid question of any religion, of any idea someone comes up with, is how do you know that that is real? Now, I couldn't necessarily prove it to you right now. If you said, prove to me God, I couldn't show you something other than what I'm doing. But if I had a time machine, I could take you back to the lake on that day and say, look at their faces as it dawns on them who's in the boat. And I could introduce you to him. A very regular looking man, but even the wind and the waves obey him. That God himself walked on the earth. We find out later in Mark, he walked on the water as well. God walked on the earth at a specific time and place. And we can feel the weight, can't we, on the disciples. It's dawning on them what's happening. That they go, this one I've read about and I've sung about in the Psalms is the same Jesus napping in the back of the boat, but the same person. And that's the same Jesus that we're meeting with now. So we need to see his identity. Like the rest of chapter 4, we need to trust the power of his word. And here we see the extent of that power. And we trust his ongoing care. Now, the early church, when they used to read this and the early church sermons, they took the passage in this way, that the boat represented the church, the storm, persecutions, and the persecutions are threatening to sink the boat as the waves crash in and impact what happens on the inside. And Jesus appears not to care as it all just carries on It's as if he's asleep. But then he steps in and he calms the storm and the chaos, and we bow down in awe. I don't think they're completely wrong. I think it's a bit too symbolic, a bit too specific. What we see, we can see why they thought that though, but what we see here is a real event, something that happened, but has broader implications. Life throws stuff at us, doesn't it? Whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, there are things that are thrown at us. There's a storm. And some of those things are not because you follow Christ. You get ill, things go wrong. There's dangers we face. Some things are, though, just because we follow Christ. Some things others just seem to happen. It appears that Jesus just sleeps through it all. That's how it feels like, doesn't it? You pray and nothing changes. But that's not so. That's not what's happening. Every choice Jesus makes is deliberate. And he's wise. Now, it's striking the power that Jesus shows in this little section. If he just had that power, wouldn't he be terrifying? But it's not just his power, it comes with his care. His power and care together. And he's wise. So every decision he makes is quite deliberate for our long-term good, not our short-term comfort. So he is sovereign over every moment, and he cares for you. Now, I can care for you. Doesn't do you much good, though, does it? Because I can't do anything about your situation. Jesus has the power and the care. And the Jesus who stilled the waves is the Jesus that we meet today. So meet him today, again, and for the first time. And as we keep on saying all the way through chapter 4, as we finish chapter 4 today, the same application, isn't it? Listen to him. Listen. So see his identity. He did and said what only God is entitled to say and do. Trust his word and its power. Chapter 4 is about the power and the effectiveness of his word. At first, it doesn't look like much. At first, it looks like nothing is happening. But then it calms the storm. It goes on to raise the dead in his timing. And so trust today that he cares for you. I'm going to pray, then we're going to sing our last hymns. Let's pray.